Hello and welcome to 21st Century Film Club. Today we're talking about Spotlight. What did you think of the film?
I thought it was a really amazing film. Like, to say I'd never watched it before, I'm so glad I did. And I think it's an important film that I'd recommend to anyone to watch. I thought they covered a topic that was really harrowing amazingly well, and they showed how journalists go about, especially an investigative journalism team, they went about it so amazingly, and even showing how at times you have to wait in order to get the fuller impact of a story to reach as many people as it can and should. I thought they did it really well, and the acting was really good as well from the cast.
Yeah, it was well written, well acted and well paced. It kind of had a bit of a slow start, but then after that, very soon it was very gripping viewing, and I really couldn't turn my eyes away, and I just wanted to get it not over with. I just wanted to see what actually happened. And even though this is a story based on real life and I could kind of guess the ending, I was very much determined to see how it unfolded, how they got there. And for a film that's on a content matter that most people would probably run away from and never want to have anything to do with and hear with, the fact that a film could so successfully keep you gripped and on tenterhooks, it was incredible. And I think there's a few main reasons of that. I think one of them's Rachel McAdams and Mark Ruffalo and Michael Bolton and Slattery. They were so great in their team. And then it was just kind of a slice of Boston life as well, and you got to learn about the culture there, the Catholic culture. And Boston's very well known for being a very poor city for both white and black Americans. And I think it was very interesting that the film, just how deep the film got with its links to kind of poverty and childhood and religion and paedophilia. It really wasn't no bars were hold. You know, they said things in that film that I really were shocking and jaw-dropping moments, like the moment when he was talking, one of the victims was talking about the priest going back to his house and then what happened with their first sexual encounter. And to me, the whole film can kind of be summed up with Rachel McAdams' character, the journalist, saying it's not good enough to say you were molested. You know, people need to hear what actually happened. And her character, it won Best Picture in 2016, and her character really, I think, was just kind of symbolic of the film, that she was a Roman Catholic, lapsed Roman Catholic, the one who attended the most out of everyone, and she kind of just had that personal connection with him, with the victims. And yeah, it's just incredible. I'm just getting ahead of myself there.
No, yeah, I agree with everything you said there. It was there's a reason why it won Best Picture. It was just an amazing film. They weren't shy in what they covered. It was really well presented, well portrayed. I think I knew the story going in. I knew the brief story going into it, but I didn't really know the full details of what really happened, and then everything that came after that as well. I really thought they did well in showing the 2001 or at least 2000 scenery. Was really good. It was hard to believe that this was a film in 2015, 2014, because it felt like, oh, this is a really early 2000s film. It was really good the way we did that. I thought Michael Keaton was really good in the film.
Yes, not Michael
Yeah,
Bolton.
I was going to say I heard that.
I don't know why I get those two names mixed up. Yes.
It's okay. Yeah, Keaton was amazing. He really commanded. It really showed he was this leading figure in this newsroom, and when he went to investigate and when he went to interview people, it was really it showed him in a really powerful way, in a really good way. And then the Mark Ruffalo's character and Rachel McAdams, they were good support. They played good supporting roles as well. And yeah, it was just a really well presented film, and yeah, there's a reason why it won Best Picture.
Yeah, I like you were saying with Rachel McAdams, I thought with her, obviously they showed her attending church still as well as she was going in the story. It highlighted well how again the story doesn't really turn off for a journalist. There's not like a time they could just be like, oh, it's home time, like that's it for the story. Like you could see the cogs sort of turning in her head, like you could see the moment that she decided, like, I can't keep attending here knowing what I know. And obviously you could see like the inner dilemma with her wanting to tell her nana, like, you know. And then I thought it was really powerful at the end when like her nana was eventually reading the story they'd worked so hard on, and just seeing like one person's account sort of in a way showed how a lot of people in the area would have been reacting to hearing the news, especially like the older generation that have probably like grown up and had that as an institution that's a pivotal part of their life, then knowing like all this truth that they'd worked so hard on to like get out there to people.
Yeah, and at the very start of the film, they're talking about, would people care about this story? Would people of Boston want to hear about this story because it's Roman Catholic, the Globe's doing well, would it turn off viewers, advertisers, all those kind of commercial concerns? But really, it's shocking that so many journalists in that room, and that's kind of the theme of the film as well, is like, why isn't this automatically newsworthy and automatically worthy of getting investigated by Spotlight, who are like the crack squad who do all the four of them all work together and spend more money and resources on it, which, as the film highlights in 2001, already the internet then was cutting into their profits. So you can imagine 10 years later and now 20 years later, just what a poor state journalism is in for investigative work especially. So that is very depressing and sad, because there's so many stories like this that need the work. And I think this film, when it was released at its time in the mid-2010s, it was a reminder to people of the power of journalism.
Well,
yeah.
A lot of times, well, like the meeting Keaton's character has with like the new boss.
Yes.
They were sort of discussing cutting the team and making cuts to the Spotlight team, because these reports take like months and months and months to uncover, and obviously that's like a lot of money to do. And obviously with news, it's hard to kind of tell readers, oh, we've got the story, but it's going to take months and months to tell. And that's like one of the reasons why investigative reporting is like kind of dying, kind of struggling, because of like the resources it takes and the amount of time it takes. So what was the question? What was I going to say?
Yeah, no, I think just to carry on from that, it is just the commercial versus, in general, it's just kind of the commercial aspect of journalism, and it's kind of fatal flaw, really, is that we have to make a living from journalism. You can't really make a living often on just going around investigating things in your spare time and putting all that effort in. And this year we saw the Nick Bully case. Yeah. A lot of amateur sleuths going around on TikTok and other people, and they were definitely invading the privacy and impeding on police investigation there too. But we have to say as a society that we do need people who care more so about the work than having a high paid job, but then they need a job where they can live on. You know, I think that's not that controversial to say of journalists. So it's how do we balance it with the light, fluffy BuzzFeed content, and then the content that takes months to do. And really, the fact, it is kind of shocking to see people not publish. We didn't really see this. They might have been publishing stuff, but it seems like those 4 people in the team didn't really do anything else, you know. And today's journalists, as they have for decades, are expected to do stories on light issues, tough issues, whether you're in broadcast or print. It's wherever you're sent, if you're sent to court. And this film did a really good job on showing a realistic version of court reporting, especially when the competitor newspaper, the other newspaper in Boston, showed up to court. Yeah. Because really that shows you that there should be more journalists in court and more open justice there, but we just don't have the funding in our society to do it. So it's I think a question from the film then is, does it take an outsider, like the new Jewish editor? And there's a lot of anti-Semitism at the end of the film, where people are getting very angry that things are about to change, and then they start pointing fingers at this the new guy, and at the beginning because of the distrust of him. Do you think it does sometimes take an outsider editor-in-chief, someone to come in and shake things up? Do you think religion or race has anything to do with that?
religion and race, I'm not too sure about that aspect of it. Maybe it is. I've not really got too much knowledge of that kind of thing. But the point you made about like a new person coming in, I think that definitely is the reason why that story got uncovered, because he kind of told him, like, can you look into his story some more? Like, it's only been covered like briefly. And like they were sort of sitting on that story for like a few years. Like they were they had all the stuff already. It was sitting in their like archives or whatever, but they failed to report on it. They kind of pointed to the fact that people like sort of buried it. They didn't really go too much into it though. They kind of made the point that it was just kind of forgotten about. But yeah, the point you make about the new person coming in, I think that's an important aspect of that particular news story being uncovered, and maybe like a fresh set of ideas is important to do. Yeah, is important. Yeah.
I thought it was important and also like pivotal that he came, because they'd all had a connection with the area. They'd grown up there, they'd gone to school there, or like they've had family there, and obviously religion was shown as being such an important institution in that part of America that I don't think they would have really thought to have gone so as deep as they did investigative wise if he hadn't come and been like, well, why aren't you focusing on it and everything? And like obviously they did have to take the break, and he did make them take the break when obviously 9/11 happened, because that was something that like no newsroom had expected to happen. But no, I thought it did take, in this particular instance, it did take the outsider to really push them into going deep into the story. And even when they wanted to go ahead and publish, like he made them reconsider and think about it more as the church of an institution. Like, are they letting this happen rather than just like focusing on like certain priest individuals?
I think this film, I really agree with your point, because I think throughout the film they were just constantly showing the connections in Boston and how insidious it all was. It was disgusting, but I think that's an issue that we have in our country as well, when you look at like elite institutions, and it's like a revolving door of media and politics. And the other issue this film raised was with religion, is you can't separate the artist from the art. So what I mean by this is the four of them were all lapsed Catholics. They had a scene which very clearly outlined that, and that was important because it showed that as journalists, you are supposed to leave your private life behind and your background behind, but you can't. We're humans. You cannot. We're not robots. You will always be biased and prejudiced. But I think it is about addressing that bias with having people like outsiders come in and having different levels of accountability, because if you all went to the same high school together and had the same priest, there's no way you can erase that.
No.
Or blank it out, but you have to address it. You can't just say, oh, this is a Boston newspaper, we don't do it.
They kept trying to find ways to try and pass the story on to other people to cover, but the new guy, he was very insistent of covering the story, but yeah, it was and also they were sort of saying, oh, maybe this would be a better story in told different ways or told by different people, but yeah, like obviously it was good that they kind of stuck with it, and you can see like the more that they found out about the story, the more invested they were and the more connected they were to the people they're talking to. And maybe if it was told by different people, maybe they wouldn't have formed that connection or formed that kind of bond or have that kind of inspiration to tell a story properly. It's a really interesting point.
Yeah, I think it shows though that beneath all the background, there are different personalities that journalists typically have, and Mark Ruffalo's character is the typical annoying, contrarian journalist who is always kind of saying the opposite of what you mean. So kind of just fights back, scrappy, all that. And he was I found it so annoying, his character, but it was good because it is realistic, and I do think certain personality types do suit journalism more. And I think what was great about this film is you had role models for lots of people. Like Rachel McAdams' character was amazing, and she was realistic, and she wasn't the typical journalist, though, like Mark Ruffalo's character is, who is just always combative and arguing against authority. It's basically anti-authoritarian. Yeah.
I don't think he's that bad. He's just someone who's like clearly passionate about his job and clearly wanted to like dig deep. Like he won't really take no for an answer. He was very clearly someone who just wanted to get the story and get the angle. And I guess you kind of need that. You needed his sort of character to get the story. To sort of fight against the people behind the desk who was like withholding information.
That's the scene I was just thinking of too. Yeah.
And then also the guy who didn't want to take the meeting, like the lawyer guy who didn't want to take the meeting with him in the first place. And you kind of need that person in the newsroom because that's just someone to fight back, I guess, and to sort of say, oh, maybe this story could be approached a different way. And obviously when they wanted to print the story, when they first got the information about the Cardinal guy.
Yeah, I think it was Cardinal Law's kind of 1961 letter or something like that.
And he had so Mark Ruffalo's character had the view that they should have printed that story now, like as soon as possible. But yes, I don't know, you kind of need that voice in a newsroom to have different opinions. Maybe it's not for everyone, but you definitely can't have everyone singing off the same hymn sheet.
It shows, I think, that there's a negative to being so stubborn, is that sometimes you can be hot-headed and you don't think things through, and you need more like cool, logical, analytical people, which I think the other kind of characters were. But they were just all examples of working together but also playing on your strengths. And it is important to have kind of role models like that for the new generation of journalists to go into reporting and feel like they are represented. And I think it is almost more helpful to be represented in personality type than it is in race or other diversity, because I think sometimes you can just say, oh, I'm like that in that situation, I'm a bit Mark Ruffalo, or I'm a bit Rachel McAdams in that situation. And that was incredible, because I think by the end of the film I was asking very much more questions about why things are run in certain ways, why are priests celibate, is there a common psychiatric phenomenon with priests? And I think the film made a very convincing argument for that, and I think that's the way the film was really structured throughout, especially with the ending where they had all the towns and states.
Yeah, I was going to say, I paused it, and then there's even like Manchester, Reading and London, even here, it just showed how widespread it is and was and still could be, because I feel like it touched on it in this film, but like you said, I feel like there's so much more to uncover, but it's just sort of like scratched the surface in some ways.
And the statistic about 50% of priests have sexual relationships, and I have heard that statistic before, and it's like, what? It's something when I heard as a child, it was like taking the veil off of like childhood and other things, because like, no, because that's not allowed, that's not the rule. But it's just an amazing way to kind of get these conversations started with people. And I think it is something that all religions and all groups should watch this film, regardless of your background, even if you are born secular, and watch this film, because it will just make you, it doesn't really go down, I would say, too much on one side, but it does provide such a convincing argument of asking questions. It's like, why in a liberal society, in a democracy, why shouldn't we be allowed to question at least institutions and these things? Is that the very least we're allowed to do? Are we? And that's the thing with this film, is like, no, Boston, the church has done so much good charity work, and that is something I've heard a lot in my life about the great charity work that the church does, which has positives to it, but that's often the argument that people who, let's say, maybe perhaps seemingly minimise the issue of paedophilia in the church, saying it's few bad apples, they often do bring up the charity work. So it's very good to see this rationalisation taking place all throughout Boston society, from the very poorest all the way to the glitzy galas and the charity fundraisers that all the hoity-toity went to. And I think that's a good way to start conversations. But yeah, no, it's a hard film to talk about with the paedophilia. It makes people really, really uncomfortable. But that's why when you watch a film, you don't have to
It almost like
He does
depicts the
it for you.
conversations you don't have, so
Yeah.
you don't have to have them. But yeah, I think it's important in highlighting it. Like I thought it cleverly showed how, like showing each of like different victim stories, it showed how the church was the one like certain in their life, like if they had a lot going on or a lot of like trauma, like the church sort of welcomed them with open arms, and like it showed how like obviously like vulnerable people were preyed upon in that situation because they didn't really have anyone else to turn to. So with the institution of religion being so strong then, like obviously it's becoming more and more secularized as time goes on, but I feel like it was so strong then that no one would really question it. Like they'd be like, oh well, you know, they're with the priest, like they'll be safe. Like there was no second guessing it. But I thought it was really important that they did highlight it, but then also show how it happened and how not people let it happen, but they just didn't like bat really an eyelid to it obviously happening so wide scale as well.
To me, it highlighted as well as to many people the need for sex education and to talk about what is sexual acts, because he just called it fiddling, which kind of desexualizes it, which again is the point of the film, is that they were just calling it fooling around, playing around, other euphemisms, so to make it more clinical and scientific.
There's like no consent mentioned really ever in that regard.
And like you can't consent, you know, as a child, and but at the time in 2001, it was very much like still in academia and an intellectual point of view to say about consent, but now it has, thanks to the Me Too movement, and most of all, become more of a mainstream word that everyone knows what consent is now, and enthusiastic consent too. But to remove the kind of the potential future of all these victims, and just comparing it, the film, when I was researching it, to Ireland, it was there was documentaries shown about it in the 90s on TV, and still like it took much longer for things to start to change, and that is the Irish Catholic element as well in Boston. Like, why is it in Boston? It's a taboo to talk about, but why is it in that American city? The start in one and the others, like Chicago, and it was. Yeah, it's just a horrible issue, but a brilliant film.
Yeah, like again. So going back to She Said briefly. So the way that film ended was with like a happy ending. I've shown like how misogyny is like solved now, and then the way this film ended was they just scratched the surface, and when Michael Keaton's character go back to the office, and it's like all these phone calls are happening. Yeah. I feel like that was a better ending, and just shows the scale, like the scale of like what's happened, and shows how widespread the issue is. And it's a really, there's a reason why like it won the best film, like I said.
As soon as the phones were mentioned, it's like, that is how it was.
Yeah.
I thought it was very obvious, but it was like, it is a famous kind of strong ending with all the calls coming through, the bells are ringing, and change is happening. But then this film definitely tempers that, and I think they just had so much reverence for the victims in this film, especially in the way that they introduced all the points of view about how the journalists, and this is the other theme of the film, was the journalistic and the legal sphere have both let these victims down, and that perhaps it kind of argues the courts are too easily manipulated through financial means, payoff settlements, NDAs, other things. And we saw the same with the Me Too, that it is a duty of journalism to be justice, but it shouldn't be that way. It should be the legal system should already have into a mind, especially you think the priority of the law is to the sanctity of children, you know, and the welfare of them. You'd assume that is where the law starts and then builds up from there. But
I thought the Rachel McAdams scene where she had to like reassure him, like obviously 9/11 had happened and it was catastrophic. I thought it was so important that she like continued to make sure she built that rapport with him back, and like really put her faith into him, like we are not going to like let you down this time, we are going to cover this story. I thought that scene was really pivotal to show like how, like, I don't know, like the importance you need to have, like, of building rapport with people to make sure that their stories are told properly and thoroughly and how they should be. Otherwise, like, the whole truth element of, like, reporting the truth and everything just comes down to nothing. Like, it was so important that she built that with him so that obviously they could provide information and help them investigate it so much more to make it the story that it was.
And it took the Armenian lawyer, the outside, to start that, because he is the one who was like, for 6 weeks, let's pull the trigger. But the issue with this journalism as well is that because of 9/11 happening, it then becomes unpatriotic to discuss such bad things. And then when is it ever going to be patriotic to discuss?
Especially with having like the religious person on the TV
talking
about it.
Yeah, with comfort to the church. And it's such a ridiculous argument, but it was around at the time in the early 2002, and it did actually influence the public reception to these events in the context of tragedy. And it is an interesting thing to think about, that journalists, we can't control the weather. We can't control the world. So if you had the climate and the context of fear, but it's up to journalists to try and change that context through their reporting and through shining a light on the victims themselves, because you have to be proactive. You can't be reactive too much with the journalism. The difference between She Said and this film is this film was just the victims were more prioritised than the journalists, and they weren't afraid of making the journalists look bad, like in that case. And there were several instances, and the theme was that the journalists and the lawyers together had failed, as well as the church, as well as Boston. And it wasn't just one plucky or two plucky reporters who changed anything, because even though Rachel McAdams' character was brilliant, she wasn't plucky character saves the world, saves the day just through her own hard work. And that's quite an individualistic message in films often. But these films are very much, as a society, we're all linked together. The question Stanley Tucci's Armenian lawyer was saying is it takes a whole village to look over this. And this film showed that very complicated network superbly. And the Catholic Church as well around the whole world is this interconnected village, and they kept the kind of the takeaway message from this film and in real life in Ireland as well was about the priests getting shuffled around to avoid the abuse, and that is like the modus operandi of this crime, and it is, it's systemic crime.
Yeah, because like they showed like at the end how the cardinal like in charge of the priesthood, I guess, in Boston, like how he's like part of the Vatican now.
That was really like a shock at the end. Yeah.
Thank you for watching the 21st Century Film Club.